He expected an obedient wife. Instead, he met the woman who changed everything. The morning his mother called to say she had found someone, Owen was standing in his kitchen staring at a crack in the ceiling he had been meaning to fix for 3 months. He was 31 years old. He had a good job, a clean apartment, and a plan for his life that fit together the way a well-built machine fits together, every part in its place, every gear turning the way it was supposed to. He was not the kind of man who left things unfinished, except the ceiling. And maybe, if he was honest with himself, one or two other things he did not like to think about. His mother's voice on the phone was careful. She had learned over the years how to present things to Owen so that he thought he was deciding when really she had already decided. She mentioned the girl, her name was Clara, in the middle of a longer sentence about a family gathering, slipped her in between news about a cousin's new job and a question about whether Owen had been eating properly. Clara was the daughter of a woman his mother had known for years. She was a biology teacher. She was 26. She was, his mother said in a tone that carried a quiet warning, not the kind of girl who needed handling. Owen did not know what that meant. He would understand it very soon. He had been raised in a household where the roles were clear. His father worked. His mother managed everything inside the home and made it look effortless. When Owen was a teenager, he had once asked his mother if she ever got tired of it, the cooking, the cleaning, the organizing of everyone else's life. She had looked at him with an expression he could not read and said, "Every person finds their place." He had taken that as agreement. He had been wrong about that too. By the time he was in his 20s, Owen had developed a very specific picture of what his future wife would look like, not physically, though he had opinions about that too, but in terms of character. She would be educated because he respected intelligence. She would be warm because he liked warmth. She would be agreeable because he believed that two people who agreed on the important things did not have to spend their life arguing. He had watched friends marry women with strong opinions and watched those marriages become exhausting negotiations. Owen did not want negotiations. He wanted a partnership where the terms were already settled. The word he would have used if he was being honest with himself was manageable. He wanted someone manageable. He would never have said it out loud. He was self-aware enough to know it would not reflect well on him. But it was there, underneath everything, running like a quiet current below all his reasonable-sounding preferences. He agreed to meet Clara. The meeting was arranged the traditional way, both families present, tea and biscuits and conversation that circled carefully around the actual point. Owen dressed well. He arrived early. He sat in the living room of a house that smelled like cardamom and old books, and he shook hands with Clara's father, a quiet man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he made small talk with Clara's mother, who was sharp-eyed and polite in a way that made Owen feel he was being evaluated at a level he could not fully see. Clara came in from the other room carrying a tray. Owen had looked at her photograph 3 days earlier and thought she was pretty in an ordinary way. In person, she was something different, not louder or more dramatic, quieter actually, but the kind of quiet that had weight to it. She set the tray down with the ease of someone who was not performing anything. She sat across from him and folded her hands in her lap and looked directly at him. Most women Owen had met in these situations looked at their hands, or at their mothers, or somewhere just past his left ear, which he had come to understand was a way of being present without committing to the room. Clara looked at him the way you look at something you are genuinely trying to figure out. He straightened slightly without meaning to. The conversation began with the usual things. His job, he was a civil engineer, currently working on a regional water infrastructure project. Her job, she taught biology to 16-year-olds and seemed to find this genuinely interesting rather than something she did while waiting for her real life to start. Her father asked about Owen's project timeline. Owen answered. His mother added something. The room moved the way these rooms were supposed to move. Then Clara asked him a question. She asked him specifically about the seismic risk calculations for the project. She had read about it, not the newspaper summary, but an academic paper published about the broader infrastructure challenges in the region. She referenced the paper by the name of its author. She asked whether the team had modeled for a particular range of soil instability that the paper had flagged as under-examined. Owen blinked. He answered. She listened. She asked a follow-up that was sharper than the first question. He answered that too, and the answer was not fully satisfying even to him, and he could see from her expression that she recognized that. His mother, somewhere to his left, refilled her teacup very carefully. Owen drove home that night with the radio off. He told himself the meeting had gone well. He told himself she was smart, which was good. He had wanted smart. He told himself the questions were just her being curious, which was fine. Curiosity was fine. He did not tell himself what was actually sitting in the back of his mind, which was the feeling that he had walked into that room expecting to make an assessment and had left feeling, for the first time in a long time, like the one being assessed. He almost called his mother to say he needed more time. He did not do that either. He sat on his sofa in his clean apartment with his plan and his machine-like life, and he looked at the crack in the ceiling and thought about a woman who had read an academic paper before meeting a stranger and had not bothered to pretend otherwise. He said yes. He told himself it was because she was smart and warm and came from a good family. All of that was true. None of it was the whole truth. The whole truth was something he could not quite name yet, something that felt like standing at the edge of a thing and not being sure whether stepping forward was brave or just careless. He said yes, and the families moved forward and the plans were made, and Owen went back to his apartment and fixed the crack in the ceiling, finally, and stood back and looked at it and thought that some things, once you noticed them, would not let you leave them alone. Clara was one of those things. He did not know yet what that would cost him, or what it would give him, or that those two things would turn out to be the same thing entirely. What he knew was this: his life had a shape he trusted. He had built it carefully. He was proud of it. He did not know that the person he had just agreed to marry would not break that shape. She would do something far more unsettling. She would make him look at it honestly. And honesty, for a man who has built his entire life around a version of himself he has never questioned, is the most disorienting thing in the world. It does not arrive like a storm. It arrives like light through a window you forgot was there. Slow, quiet, and once it is in the room, you cannot pretend the room was always that bright. Owen went to bed that night with his plan intact and his future settled, and a feeling in his chest he could not name. Clara, across the city, graded papers until midnight and made herself a cup of tea and thought about a man who had answered her questions carefully and looked at her, for one brief moment, like he had not expected her to exist. She was used to that look. She did not take it personally. She would learn that with Owen, nothing was quite that simple, that the look had not been surprise the way she assumed. It had been recognition, the terrifying kind, where you see something in a stranger that shows you something in yourself, and you are not yet sure whether to be grateful or afraid. She turned off the light. The apartment was quiet. 2 months from now, they would be married. Neither of them was ready. Neither of them knew that. And maybe that is the only way any real story ever begins, not with two people who are ready, but with two people who are honest enough eventually to become so. Clara moved in on a Saturday. Owen had prepared the apartment the way he prepared everything, methodically, with a system. He had cleared half the wardrobe. He had left space on the kitchen shelves. He had bought new towels, matching ones, which he considered both practical and a gesture of welcome. He stood in the hallway when the car pulled up outside and felt something that he identified as readiness, which was the closest word he had for it, though it was not quite right. The first thing Clara brought through the door was a box of books. Not clothes, not kitchen things, not the small domestic objects Owen had expected. Books, a large, heavy box of them, and she carried it herself, and when Owen reached out to take it from her, she looked at him with a slight lift of her eyebrow that said she had the box handled and did not need the intervention, thank you. He stepped back. She set the box down. She looked around the apartment the way she had looked at him in that first meeting, steady, reading, taking her time. She said it was a nice place. He said thank you. She asked where he kept the kettle. That was how it began. Owen had imagined the early weeks of marriage would have a natural settling period, two people learning each other's rhythms, a gentle, gradual folding of one life into another. He had imagined some adjustment, some compromise. He was not unrealistic, but he had imagined a process that moved in one direction. He had assumed, without ever examining the assumption, that the adjustment would be mostly hers. She would learn his routines. She would find her place in the apartment, in the schedule, in the shape of the days. He would be patient. He would be welcoming. He would be a good husband by every standard he had ever been taught. Clara did not adjust in the direction he expected. She put her books on the shelf in the living room, not on the shelf he had designated on his clear your throat inner list for shared things, but on the shelf he had always thought of as his reading shelf. She cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays because those were the evenings she had energy for it. On other evenings, she ordered food from a place she liked, or she suggested they cook together, or she ate leftovers standing at the kitchen counter while reading something on her phone. She was not chaotic. She was organized, actually, in her own way, a way Owen did not initially recognize as organization, because it looked nothing like his. She was also, every morning, awake before him. This surprised Owen more than it should have. He was an early riser. He had always been an early riser. It was one of the things he privately considered a mark of discipline. Clara was up at 5:30, sitting at the kitchen table with her tea and a notebook, writing things, lesson plans sometimes, but other times just writing, thoughts and questions and lists that seemed to have no particular purpose. When he came into the kitchen, she would look up and say good morning and offer him the other half of whatever she was eating, and then go back to what she was doing. She did not ask if he had slept well. She did not perform cheerfulness. She was just there in the morning, fully herself, already in the middle of her own mind. Owen found this difficult to explain. He had expected to be the one setting the tone of the mornings. He had not said this to anyone, including himself. But it was there, the assumption that he would be the first one awake, the one who made the tea, the one around whom the morning arranged itself. Instead, he was waking up to a woman who was already an hour deep into her own day, who made room for him at the table without making the table about him. The feeling this gave him was not comfortable. It was something that sat between admiration and irritation, and for several weeks he could not decide which side of it he was on. At work, Owen was respected. He was the kind of engineer people turned to when a problem was complicated and the solution needed to be right. He was calm under pressure. He made decisions well. His team trusted him, and he trusted himself, and the whole structure of his professional life was built on a version of himself he had tested and found reliable. He came home one evening in the third week of marriage to find Clara on the phone, speaking with a parent of one of her students. He could hear from the kitchen, where he was putting away his bag, that the conversation was difficult. A student was struggling. The parent was frustrated, pushing back on something, and Clara's voice was steady but firm. She said, "I understand your concern, and I want to help, but this approach is not working for your son, and if you would like to talk about what will work, I am here for that conversation." She said it without apology, without softening it into something untrue, without performing agreeableness to smooth over a real problem. She said it the way Owen solved engineering problems, with clarity, without decoration. He stood in the kitchen with his bag in his hand and listened to her finish the call and felt something shift inside him that he was not ready to examine. He had been waiting, without knowing it, for her to be smaller than this. Not smaller in a cruel way, not because he wanted to hurt her, but because a person who is exactly the size of themselves, who takes up exactly the space they are supposed to take up, is confronting in a way that is hard to name. Owen had spent his entire adult life being the most capable person in the room. Not arrogantly, he was not arrogant, but he had built his self-image around a kind of reliable competence, a sense that he managed things well, that he was the steady point around which other things turned. Clara was not turning around him. She was orbiting her own center, and her center was solid. He said dinner smells good when she came into the kitchen after the call. She said it was the leftovers from Tuesday. He said that was fine. They ate at the table and she told him about the student, not everything, just enough, and asked what he thought. He told her. She considered it and said he might be right, and she had not thought about it from that angle. It was a small thing, a small, ordinary marital exchange. But it stayed with Owen that night because he realized it was the first time she had said he might be right about something, and the reason it stayed with him was because she said it like someone who had genuinely considered the idea and found it worth keeping, not like someone performing agreement. It felt strangely like being taken seriously by someone whose seriousness he had already recognized mattered to him. The third month was the hardest. Owen could not have pointed to a specific moment or argument. There was no explosion. There was no betrayal. What there was friction, steady, low level, the kind that happens when two people with different shapes try to share the same space. Owen liked the apartment arranged a certain way. Clara was not careless about it, but she was also not going to rearrange her working habits around his preferences when her habits had their own logic. He wanted evenings that had a predictable structure. She wanted evenings that had room to breathe. They argued twice properly, once about the scheduling of something that was really not about the scheduling at all, and both of them knew it and neither of them said so. Once about a dinner he had invited people to without telling her, because it had not occurred to him to check first, because in the model of marriage he had inherited, the wife made herself available for the husband's social arrangements. Clara looked at him across the kitchen after that one and said quietly that she was not against the dinner, she was against not being asked. He said he had not thought it would be an issue. She said she knew. The way she said it, not angry, not wounded, just clear-eyed and a little tired, was worse than anger would have been. Anger he could have responded to, defended against, resolved with an apology. This was something else. This was her holding up a mirror. He saw something in it he did not like. Not her, himself. The version of himself that had walked into this marriage with a list he had not admitted he was carrying. The version that had genuinely believed, without ever interrogating it, that the natural order was one in which he was the axis. She was not asking him to be less. She was asking him to be different. And different, for a man who has been certain of who he is for 31 years, feels at first like being asked to be less. He sat with it. He was not by nature a man who ran from things he did not understand. That was the engineer in him. You sat with the problem. You did not pretend the crack in the wall was not there. You figured out what had caused it and you fixed it properly, or you did not fix it at all. He began to sit with the problem of himself. It was not dramatic, no single revelation, no conversation where everything became clear. Just Owen alone in the car on the way to work, or lying awake at 2 a.m, slowly, uncomfortably, turning over the things he had always assumed and looking at them from the underside. His mother called mid-month to ask how things were going. He said well. She asked if Clara was settling in. He said yes in her way. His mother was quiet for a moment and then said, "She reminds me a little of myself, before." Owen wanted to ask what that meant, before what, before whom, but his mother had already moved on to something about his father's health, and the moment passed, and Owen filed it in the part of his mind where he kept the things he was not ready to look at yet. He came home on a Thursday evening to find Clara on the sofa with her legs curled under her, grading papers. The lamp was on, the apartment was warm. She had her red pen in her hand and a look on her face that was half frustration and half something that might have been amusement, probably a student's answer she had not expected. She did not look up when he came in. She said, "There is pasta on the stove and I made enough for 2, and then she went back to the papers. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her without her knowing. He thought about the word manageable, the word he had never said out loud. He thought about the list. He thought about the version of marriage he had walked in carrying like something he had been handed as a child and never once thought to put down. He put his bag down and went to the kitchen and served the pasta and brought both plates back to the living room and sat beside her on the sofa and did not turn the television on. She finished the paper she was grading and set it on the pile and picked up her plate and said, "How was the sight today?" He told her all of it, not the summary he usually gave, the professional version, but the actual day, including the part where he had made a call he was second-guessing. She listened. She asked one question. It was the right question. He looked at her. She was eating pasta and waiting for his answer, completely unaware that she had just asked the exact question he had been trying to formulate for himself for 3 hours. The pasta was good. The apartment was warm. Outside, it had started to rain. Owen thought with a slowness that was nothing like an epiphany and everything like the truth arriving in its own time, that he had come into this marriage looking for a woman who would fit into his life. He had instead found a life worth fitting into. He was not ready to say that yet. He was not ready for most of what was coming. But the thought was there now, small and inconvenient and entirely real, sitting between them on the sofa while the rain came down and Clara picked up the next paper and uncapped her red pen. He thought, "This is going to change me." He was right. He just did not know yet how much he still needed to be changed or what it was going to take to get him there. Owen got sick in the 7th month of their marriage. It was not something dramatic. It started as the kind of thing men like Owen dismiss: a scratchy throat, a heaviness in the chest, the vague feeling of being slightly less than operational. He told himself it would pass. He went to work on Monday and on Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning he could not get out of bed without a coughing fit that left him bent over the edge of the mattress, eyes watering, wondering how something so ordinary had become this unpleasant. Clara stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at him with the expression she had when she had already assessed a situation and drawn her conclusions. She said, "You are not going to work today." He said he had a site meeting. She said the site would manage without him. He started to say something about the meeting again, and she walked to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water and 2 tablets and put them on the bedside table and said, "Call your team and tell them you are unwell." It was not quite a command. It was not quite a suggestion. It was something in between, the kind of sentence that leaves no real room for argument, delivered by someone who has no interest in the argument either way. He called his team. He stayed in bed. The first day was fine. Owen was not good at rest, but he was good at endurance, and he treated the day the way he would have treated any unpleasant task. He got through it. He slept in the late morning and woke up to find a bowl of soup on the nightstand that was still warm, which meant she had been in the room without waking him. He ate it without knowing why that small detail affected him the way it did. The second day was harder. The fever came in the evening, not high but enough, and it stripped something away, the careful management he was always doing, the holding together of himself. He lay in the dark and felt the specific vulnerability of being ill as an adult, which is nothing like being ill as a child, because as an adult you are aware of everything you cannot do, and there is no one who is required by love or duty to take care of you. He had not thought about that before, whether anyone was required. He had assumed somewhere in the structure of marriage that care came with it, but requirement and willingness are different things. Clara had not signed a document about soup and night checks. She was doing it because she chose to, and she was choosing to without announcement, without making it a thing, without looking at him in a way that suggested she expected gratitude. She brought things and left. She came back. She moved through the role the way she moved through everything, with a quiet, unceremonious competence that had nothing to prove. On the third night, Owen was awake at 2 a.m. The fever had broken but left behind a kind of restless, half-lit wakefulness where sleep felt just far enough away to be unreachable. He was lying on his back staring at the ceiling, no crack in it. He had fixed that, but the habit of staring at it remained when he heard Clara get up from the sofa where she had been sleeping so she would not disturb him. He expected to hear the sound of the kitchen or the bathroom. Instead, the bedroom door opened quietly and she came in and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then she reached over and picked up the book from his nightstand, his book, the one he had been reading before he got sick, which he had not asked her to touch, and she opened it to somewhere near the middle, and in the dim light coming from the hall she began to read aloud. Her voice was low, steady. She read the way she did everything, without performance, without self-consciousness, as if reading to someone in the dark at 2 a.m. was a natural and reasonable thing to do. She did not ask if he wanted her to, she just began. He lay very still. The story she was reading from was nothing remarkable, a novel he had picked up at an airport, the kind of book that passes the time without demanding much. But her voice in the dark made it something else. The words came in slowly, evenly, filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with the words themselves and everything to do with the choice to be there in the dark, not sleeping, holding the book he had not asked her to hold. He thought about his father, who had been sick once badly when Owen was 12. He thought about how his mother had managed everything during that time, the household, the children, the medical appointments, with such seamless efficiency that Owen had never quite registered it as care. He had registered it as function, the machine running, everything handled. He looked at Clara in the half-dark and understood, for the first time in his life, the difference between being managed and being loved. They were not the same thing. He had grown up in a house where they looked identical. The meals, the clean clothes, the organized appointments, all of it done without complaint, without dramatization, and he had called it love because everyone called it love, but it had none of this. None of this being in the room at 2 a.m. because you cannot sleep and I did not want you to be alone. None of this choice. She finished a chapter and closed the book and looked at him in the dark. He said quietly that he was sorry about the dinner, the one he had arranged without telling her. It had been months ago. He had apologized at the time, or something that functioned as an apology, the kind that means I acknowledge this was a problem, rather than the kind that means I understand why. She was quiet for a moment. She said she knew. Not like the first time she had said it, tired and holding up a mirror. This time it was softer, smaller. She said she knew, and what she meant was I believed you even when you did not fully believe yourself. Owen was quiet for a long time after that. He thought about the word manageable. He thought about it with a shame that surprised him by how sharp it was, even now, even months after he had started putting the list down. He thought about all the ways he had walked into this marriage with an invisible instruction manual for who his wife was supposed to be, and how that manual had been written by people who had never met Clara, who had never imagined Clara, who had built their vision of a good wife from a version of compliance they called contentment. He said, I had this idea of what you would be like. She asked what the idea was. He told her all of it, more honestly than he had told himself. He said it without softening it, because she had done nothing since the day they met to deserve the softened version of his truth. She listened without expression, the book still in her lap. When he finished, she said, I know, I could see it. He asked why she had agreed to marry him then. She thought about this for a moment in a way that was genuine, not performed. She said, because underneath the idea you had, there was a person asking a real question, and I was curious about the person. Owen looked at the ceiling. He said, I am not the person you thought I was. She said, you are exactly the person I thought you were. You just had not met yourself yet. He did not have an answer for that. He lay in the dark with the fever gone and the night around them and his wife on the edge of the bed with his book in her lap, and he felt something he had no language for yet, something that had no shape he recognized, that was not comfort exactly and not relief exactly, but was something adjacent to both of them, and something adjacent to the terrifying, specific feeling of being known. He slept, a real sleep, deep and quiet, the kind that does not happen when you are managing yourself. In the morning, Clara made tea, and he came to the kitchen still moving slowly, and she handed him the cup and went back to her notebook, and he sat across from her, and they did not talk about the night before. They did not need to. What had happened was not the kind of thing that needed to be processed out loud. It had happened. It was real. It was inside both of them now, and it would stay there. He went back to work 2 days later. His team welcomed him back with a joke about him being human after all. He laughed, and it was a real laugh, not the social version. He drove home that evening thinking about the word his mother had used on the phone months ago. Before. She reminds me of myself, before. He understood now what she meant. He was not ready to call her and say he understood. He would, eventually. But for now he held it in his mind and let it sit where it belonged, next to the other things he had been wrong about for a long time without knowing it. Clara was at the kitchen table when he came in. She looked up and said, "How was the sight?" And he sat down and told her, all of it, the real version, and she asked the question that cracked the problem open, and he answered it. And outside, the evening came down over the city, and the apartment was warm and ordinary and full of the quiet, unremarkable fabric of two people who were, slowly and imperfectly, learning each other. It was not what he had planned. It was better than anything he had known how to plan for. Owen's colleague was the first person who noticed the change, and he noticed it the way people notice small things that accumulate quietly over time, not in a single moment, but in a dozen small moments that suddenly add up. His name was Peter. He had worked alongside Owen for 4 years. He was the kind of man who knew people well, not through emotional attentiveness, but through the long, patient observation of watching how someone behaves when a project is running late or a decision lands wrong. He had known Owen through 2 difficult contracts and 1 near disaster involving a miscalculated load bearing on a pedestrian bridge that had kept them both in the office until midnight for 11 consecutive days. Peter said one afternoon over terrible office coffee that Owen had changed. Owen asked what he meant. Peter said he was harder to predict now. That he used to always know what Owen's reaction to something would be before Owen reacted, and now he did not always know. And he meant it as a compliment, but he also meant it as a genuine observation, as a question he was curious about. Owen thought about this on the way home. He thought about what predictable had meant before, a certain way of entering a room, a certain register, composed, competent, ever so slightly closed. He had always considered this composure a strength. He had not considered that composure and absence were not the same thing. Clara had a friend visiting when he arrived. Her name was Ruth, a woman Owen had met twice before, a teacher like Clara, with a directness that matched Clara's and a laugh that arrived without warning and filled the room. Owen had found Ruth slightly exhausting the first time. He had found himself comparing her to the kind of company that requires maintenance, the kind of social energy that demands you perform enjoyment. That evening he sat in the living room with them and did not perform anything and found, to his quiet surprise, that the conversation was genuinely good. Ruth was funny in a way that worked because she was also honest. Clara laughed in the way she laughed when something struck her as actually funny, not the polite version. Owen said something at one point, a dry observation about something that had happened at work, and both of them laughed, and Ruth said to Clara, "He is funnier than you told me," and Clara said, "I told you he was funny," and Owen realized, without any dramatic awareness of the moment, that he had been talked about between these 2 women with a warmth that assumed the best of him. He had not realized how much he had wanted to be the person someone assumed the best of. His mother came to visit in the 9th month. She stayed for a week. It was the first time she had spent more than an afternoon with Owen and Clara together, and Owen watched her watch them the way you watch a person read something you have written, aware of every possible reaction. His mother was not effusive. She did not make proclamations. She helped in the kitchen in a way that was genuine rather than performative, and she talked with Clara about things Owen had not known his mother talked about, the years before his parents married, a job she had once wanted and not taken, opinions she had about things that had never come up in their household because his father had not been interested in her opinions, and so she had simply stopped offering them. Owen sat with this. He thought about his father, who was not a bad man. He had been kind in his way, steady. He had provided, he had been present. But Owen looked at his mother in his kitchen talking to Clara about the things she had thought and wanted and decided over 40 years of a life his father had never fully inquired about, and he understood something he had not understood before about how an absence can look like a presence for a very long time. He pulled his mother aside on the third day and asked her genuinely if she had been happy. She looked at him for a long time. She said, "I was content. There is a difference." He wanted to ask more. She gave him the look that meant the conversation had reached its natural end on her terms. He nodded. He let her go back to the kitchen. But the word stayed with him, content, and what lived inside the word when you examined it closely, the way it meant something was enough when you had never been sure that enough was what you wanted. Owen did not want Clara to be content. He wanted her to be exactly what she already was, fully, inconveniently, specifically herself. This realization should have been simple. It did not feel simple. It felt like the careful dismantling of something he had spent years building, and even when you dismantle a thing that needed dismantling, there is grief in it. A version of himself was ending, the version that had known the shape of his future and trusted it, the version that had walked into a marriage with an invisible contract and called it partnership. He grieved it quietly and without drama, the way he did most things, and on the other side of it was something lighter. He started a mentorship program at work. This was Clara's suggestion, made offhand one evening when he was complaining about the shortage of good junior engineers coming through. She said, "Then develop the ones you have." He had said it was not that simple. She said, "Most things that look complicated are just things we have not decided to do yet." He started the program 2 weeks later. The first mentee was a 24-year-old named Will, quiet and technically gifted but hesitant in meetings, the kind of hesitation that comes from being smart enough to know how much you do not know and not yet brave enough to speak from that place. Owen recognized something in him. He began working with Will in a way he had not worked with younger colleagues before, not just technically, but talking about the experience of being in a room where the decisions were bigger than you, and how you built the muscle for it, and how the muscle came from being wrong in small ways and staying in the room anyway. He was, without fully realizing it, talking about himself. Clara noticed. She said, "One evening, you talk about Will a lot." He said he supposed he did. She said that was a good thing. He said he was not sure he was doing it right. She said, "The fact that you are not sure means you are probably doing it better than you think." He looked at her across the table. He thought about the day she had said, "You are exactly the person I thought you were. You just had not met yourself yet." He thought about who he had been 11 months ago. The clean apartment, the machine-like life, the list he had not admitted to carrying. He thought about how fully he had believed that life was working. He thought about how small it would have stayed. His mother left at the end of the week. He walked her to the taxi and she hugged him. She was not a person who hugged often, another inheritance from a household where affection was present but not worn openly, and she said quietly in his ear, "She is something." He said, "Yes, I know." His mother got into the taxi and he stood on the pavement and watched it go and thought, she should have had someone who knew she was something too. He went back inside. Clara was washing up in the kitchen. She had the radio on low. She was thinking about something, not present in the room exactly, just in the general vicinity of it while her mind was elsewhere, which was a thing she did that Owen had once found slightly distancing and now found entirely his own. He knew where to reach her. He knew what she was when she came back. That knowledge felt like the most solid thing he owned. He walked into the kitchen and stood beside her at the sink and picked up a dish towel and dried the bowl she handed him without a word. She glanced at him. She said, "Your mother is good." He said, "I know. I think I am only just understanding how good." She handed him another bowl. He dried it. The radio played something low and indistinct. Outside the window, the evening was ordinary and the city made its ordinary sounds, and inside the apartment, two people stood at a sink with the easy, unremarkable closeness of a life genuinely shared. Owen thought, I almost had a completely different version of this. He thought about it the way you think about a road you almost took, not with guilt, not with the wish to go back, with the clean, specific gratitude of someone who stepped off the wrong road before it went too far. Clara handed him the last bowl. He dried it and put it away and folded the dish towel and turned and looked at her in the kitchen light and felt the word that had been building for a long time, the word he had not had the vocabulary for when he agreed to this marriage, the word he had earned through illness and difficult evenings and mirrors he had not wanted to look into. He felt lucky, not in the easy, unexamined way, in the way that costs something, in the way that requires you to become the version of yourself that is worthy of the thing you have, which is the hardest work most people ever do. He was not finished, he knew that. There were more rooms in himself that he had not entered yet, more versions of his own assumptions waiting to be examined in the light she had let in. But he was in the room. That was what mattered. He was in the room and he was staying. Owen turned 37 on a Tuesday in March and did not make a particularly large event of it. He had never been someone who required a fuss about birthdays. The year before, Clara had taken him to a restaurant he had mentioned once in passing, months earlier, the kind of detail she held without making a show of holding it. He had not known she was keeping it. That was the thing about her. She paid attention without announcement. She filed things away not for leverage or performance, but simply because she was a person who found other people genuinely interesting. Being found genuinely interesting by Clara was, Owen had come to understand, one of the rarer gifts of his life. This year she cooked. She made the kind of meal that takes all afternoon, not complicated food, not food for impressing, but food made with actual care, with the particular attention of someone who knows what you like and makes it well and does not require applause for the making. She opened a bottle of something she had been keeping for a reason, and they ate at the table, and Will came by later with his girlfriend, a quietly confident woman named Kate who made Owen think of Clara's particular gravity, that way of being completely themselves in a room without effort. He noticed that Will looked at Kate sometimes with the half-aware, slightly astonished expression Owen had come to recognize because he had worn it himself. He said nothing about it. Some things were better left for people to discover. After Will and Kate left, Owen and Clara sat in the living room with what remained of the evening. She had her feet tucked under her on the sofa, which was her default position when she was comfortable and not thinking about being comfortable. The lamp was on. The books were on the shelf, her books, which had long since stopped being her books and become just the books, belonging to the apartment the way furniture belongs to a room. He looked at them, he thought about that first Saturday, the box she had carried through the door herself, and the slight eyebrow when he had reached for it. He said, "Do you remember the day you moved in?" She said yes. He asked what she had been expecting. She was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was taking something seriously. Then she said she had expected it to be harder. She said she had known he had an idea of what a wife was supposed to be, and she had expected to fight for more space than the apartment initially offered, and she had been ready for that, not dreading it, just ready. He asked if it had been what she expected. She said parts of it. She said the dinner arrangement had been exactly what she expected. She said the 7th month, the sickness, the night with the book, she had not expected that, not the conversation, not what he had told her in the dark. She said men who hold things that tightly rarely put them down, and when he put them down, she had not anticipated how quickly it had happened once he decided. He thought about the word decided. He was not sure it had felt like a decision. It had felt more like finally seeing something that had been in the room the entire time, waiting for his vision to adjust. He said, "I think I had been building a version of my life that looked correct from the outside." She said she knew. He said, "I think a lot of people do that." She said yes. She said the difficult thing was not the building. The difficult thing was being honest enough when the time came to look at what you had built and ask whether it was what you actually wanted or just what you had always been told to want. Owen thought about his father. He thought about the years of an orderly household, the meals and the schedules, and his mother's voice on the phone saying she had been content. He thought about his mother's eyes when she talked in Clara's kitchen about the things she had never been asked about, the brightness there, the particular energy of a person who has found an audience for thoughts they have been keeping in a room by themselves for a long time. He thought about what he had almost replicated without knowing it, the careful reproduction of an inheritance you have never examined, how easy it was, how invisible. He said, "My mother should have had more." Clara looked at him. She said, "She did not have less because your father was a bad person." He said he knew. She said, "Sometimes people simply do not know what they do not know. The question is what you do once you know." He nodded slowly. He had done things over the past years that he had not done before. He had asked his mother questions he had never thought to ask. She had answered some of them and deflected others, and once on a phone call, she had cried very briefly and then composed herself and said, "I am fine," and he had not moved the conversation along the way he would have before. He had stayed in the silence and let it be what it was, and she had said, after a moment, "I know." And they had both understood each other in a way they never had in 37 years of loving each other at a careful distance. Peter had moved into a more senior position, and Owen had recommended him without being asked. The junior engineers on the team were performing better than the team average from the previous year. Will had made a presentation in front of the regional board that Owen had helped him prepare for, and had done it with the kind of grounded confidence that comes from being genuinely seen by someone who knew what they were looking at. Owen had learned this from Clara, not because she had taught it as a lesson, because he had watched her do it with her students, with her colleagues, with Ruth, with his own mother in the kitchen, and recognized the thing she was doing, which was simply to be present with people in a way that made them feel they were worth being present for. He had been practicing it. He was not as natural at it as she was. He was an engineer. He still defaulted to the problem-solving mode, the assessment, the solution. But he was learning to wait before he moved to the solution, to ask the question before he offered the answer, to stay in the room. He looked at Clara on the sofa and thought about the photograph he had looked at before they met, the slightly off-camera look, the mid-thought expression. He had not known what to make of it then. He knew now what it was. It was a person who was already somewhere interesting when the picture was taken, and who had not stopped being somewhere interesting since. He had been given, without deserving it in the way the word deserving is usually applied, a front-row seat to that mind for 6 years. 6 years of dinner conversations that changed how he saw problems. 6 years of being asked questions he had not thought to ask himself. 6 years of being in the room with someone whose standard for honesty had, through proximity and time, become his own. He was not the same person. He meant that in the only way that mattered, not that he had lost himself, but that he had found himself, or rather that she had stood in his life like light in a room and made it impossible, eventually, to keep mistaking the shadows for the furniture. He said, "I have been thinking about what I would tell someone if they asked me what I had learned." She looked at him with interest. She did not say, "Go on," or "Tell me." She just waited, which was its own kind of invitation. He said, "I think I would tell them that the most important thing a person can do in a marriage is be curious about who they actually married, not who they imagined. Not who they needed, who they actually married." She considered this. She said, "And who did you actually marry?" He looked at her. He said, "Someone who was already at the center of herself when I found her, someone who did not need me to give her a shape because she already had one. The best I could do was stop trying to change it and start being interested in it." She was quiet, the lamp was on, the books were on the shelf. Then she said, "That is also, more or less, who you became." He did not understand immediately. Then he did. He had spent years waiting for a woman to fit into the shape of his life. What had actually happened was that he had grown into the shape of himself, the real shape, not the inherited one, not the constructed one, because someone had stood in his life and expected nothing less and accepted nothing less, not through demand but through the simple, steady pressure of being completely real. You could not live with a person like that and stay untrue to yourself, not for long. It was not comfortable, but it was the only comfortable that mattered, the kind where what you showed the world matched what lived inside you, where the life you were living was the one you had actually chosen. Clara reached over and picked up her book from the side table. She opened it to where she had left off. The evening continued. Owen looked at the room around him, the lamp, the books, the woman on the sofa with her feet tucked under her, already somewhere interesting, and felt something that had no drama in it at all, which was perhaps why it was so certain. He had come looking for a woman who would fit into his plan. He had stayed to become someone worthy of a life neither of them could have planned. That was the whole story, not the version he would have told 6 years ago with its clean edges and its manageable outcomes. The real version, the one that had required him to be wrong and stay in the room, the one that had cost him a comfortable certainty and given him, in exchange, something that did not need to be certain to be real. Clara turned a page. Owen picked up his own book. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do, indifferent and continuous, and inside the apartment, 2 people sat in a warm room reading, which is one of the quietest and most complete descriptions of a life well built that exists. It had taken everything to get here. It had been worth every single thing it cost.